Hello friends, Moreland here with another BDO 2017 guide on worker nodes. This time we're going to go beyond the top 10 list and into advanced strategies for how to prioritize and maximize your entire worker empire. As always, feel free to check the description for a summary of this video with timestamps for you to skip around if you choose. The first concept that we're going to go over that's going to serve as sort of the foundation for making smart decisions about your workers are the fundamentals of workload and distance. So it's very important to understand how workload is calculated because it's not as simple as just taking the workload of the node and dividing it by the worker's speed. So if you're not familiar with what these numbers mean, the workload is the load of the potato node itself. So that doesn't change as we go to worker from worker to worker. It's always a workload of 199, or in this case, it's usually 200 for the potato node. The workload actively changes according to how many players are on that node. Each node has a minimum and a maximum workload value. In the case of the potato node, this is a very popular one. It has a base workload of 100, but it can go all the way up to 200. So the maximum for each node is basically double the base. And the potato node is pretty much always max. It's pretty much always at 200. We might even see it jump from 199 up to 200 throughout the course of this video. But basically, that is the load of the node itself. And you don't just want to divide this by the worker speed. That's not how the game calculates it. Basically, what it does is it divides it by the worker speed, but then it rounds up to the nearest whole number. So in this case, it's calculated in, we'll call them maybe thresholds or ticks. And if we look at the human who's got 109 speed and the goblin who's got 150 speed, they're both going to complete this node in 2 ticks. Each tick is 10 minutes of work time. So both of these workers are basically doing the potato node in 10 minutes plus another 10 minutes plus whatever the distance is. That's how they're arriving at 22 and 23 minutes. The human's got a little bit slower speed, so his distance takes a little bit longer, and that's how we're seeing these numbers up here. Now, if we look at this giant who's only got 76 speed, you see suddenly it jumps way up to 37 minutes. Now, a couple of those minutes are because he's got very low move speed, but 10 of those minutes are because he requires a third tick of work to complete this node. So another way to think about this is that if a worker had over 200 speed, they could do this in 1 tick. However, anything below 200, anything from 199 all the way down to 100 is going to be 2 ticks. And then anything below 100 all the way down to about 67 would be 3 ticks. Anything from 67 to about 50 would be 4 ticks. And the only thing that's important here are those breakpoints, 200, 100, 67, 50. Every number in between those numbers doesn't matter. So this goblin at 150, this human at 109, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter until we get below 100, in the case of this giant, then it jumps up to 3 ticks instead of 2. So hopefully that makes sense. If you want to calculate distance offhand, like if you're theory crafting and you don't want to actually check the node, there's a way to do that as well. It's pretty simple. You basically just divide the distance by the worker's move speed, and then you multiply by 2 because he's got to go to the node and then back to the town. And that's the number of seconds. So to put this all together, let's bring out a calculator. And in this case, the goblin with 150, see, look, it just jumped up to 200. We take that 200, we divide it by 150, which is the goblin speed. We get 1.3. We have to round that up to the nearest whole number. So we have to round that up to 2. Okay, so he's going to do this in 2 ticks. We've established that each tick is 10 minutes. So that's 20 minutes of work so far. And then we tack on the distance. To get the distance, we take 535 in this case. We divide it by 7.82, which is the worker speed. We get 68 seconds. We double that, and the total is 136 seconds, which you can already see if we convert that to minutes. That is 2 and, a quarter minutes, basically, which is 2 minutes and 16 seconds. So there you go. 2 ticks of 10 minutes each gets you 20 minutes. And then the distance gets you that extra 2 minutes and 16 seconds for a total of 22 minutes and 16 seconds. That is how the game calculates how long each of your workers is going to take. Let's look at one more example briefly, because I know this can be kind of dense to absorb when you're first learning it. Let's look at another example. I'm going to drive home this whole idea of thresholds. So in this case, we have a goblin with 150 speed and a human with 106 speed. You can see the human takes 29.5 minutes to do this, and the goblin only takes 15 or about 16 minutes to do it. So the goblin is way faster. And the reason for that is because this goblin is actually so fast that he exceeds the entire node's workload. So the birch node here normally has a workload of about 150. This goblin speed is 150.75. So he can do this entire workload in one tick, which means the whole thing is calculated by just 10 minutes plus distance. This human is much slower because he doesn't have 150. So it takes him 2 ticks. So 10 minutes plus 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And then adding distance on top of that, you get the total of 29 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's why in the top 10 node video, I suggest that you work as hard as you can to get 150 speed goblins on nodes that cap out at 150. Nodes don't always cap out at 150. Usually the most common points for nodes to cap out at are either 150 or 200. And generally speaking, you want goblins on the 150 nodes and humans on the 200 workload nodes. The reason for that is because the extra stamina that the human has will get you more work done while you're asleep. And in order to figure this out, maybe you don't have artisan workers. Maybe the idea of a goblin with 150 speed is, maybe you just started the game and you're nowhere close to that. I've put together a tool that will help you guys sort this out for yourselves. So I'll put a link to this in the description. This is my personal one, so the numbers are a little bit different than what you'll see on the public version. But basically, you can save a copy of this for your own personal use. And I've plugged in the numbers in this case for this potato node. Let's click on that again. So 22 and 16 seconds versus 23 and 35 seconds. I've basically plugged those in here. And you can see worker 1. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Worker 1 here is the goblin with 15 stamina. Worker 2 here is the human with 23 stamina. And down here, I've got the number of hours a day where I'm able to feasibly be semi-active. So you don't literally have to be sitting in front of your computer 15 hours a day. You just need to be able to check your computer before your worker runs out of stamina. So whatever that number is for you, maybe you work all day long and you only have, 6 hours where you can check it, and the other the other 18 hours a day you're inactive. That would change the calculation here. It's really just up to you and your playstyle. Once you get artisan goblins, you only have to feed them, even on really quick nodes, you only have to feed them about every 3 to 4 hours. So if you're at work, but you can remote in on break and just, feed your workers real quick and click the refresh button and then go back to doing whatever you're doing, then you can count those as semi-active hours for the purpose of this tool. But obviously the inactive hours are when you just can't be by your computer at all, whether you're asleep or at work or whatever it is on a daily basis. So just tweak these numbers according to your own particular playstyle. And then you can use the stamina and the speed that your worker displays. So in this case, the 23 minutes that is being displayed in game. You can pop that into the worker comparison tool, and you can see which worker is better. In this case, we can see that during the day, while I'm active or semi-active, the goblin works harder. But at night, the human works harder because he has more stamina. And if you total these things together, the human ends up being quite a bit better than the goblin for this potato node. And if you have artisan workers, that's going to be the case for just about every 200 speed node, you're going to want a human, and for just about every 150 speed node, you're going to want a goblin. There are exceptions to that, like I said, depending on your playstyle and also depending on distance. If a node is very far away from town, you might still want to use a goblin for that extra move speed. And you can figure that out very easily by just plugging in the in-game values into this, and it'll spit it out and give you the total and tell you which worker's better. So that is how you use the worker comparison tool. There is another even more powerful tool that I'm going to show you guys, which is the overall node spreadsheet tool. Let me go ahead and bring that thing up. Again, I will put a link to this in the description. And for this one, I will I'll try to do this slowly, but not too slowly. Basically, let's go column by column. We're going to start off over here. This is where this just tells you what the node is and what the primary material you're going to get from that node is. This spreadsheet has every node in the game except for fishing nodes. We might add fishing nodes to it later, but for now, it's just all the nodes that you would get on land. This thing up in the top left corner is just a simple distance and speed calculator. You don't really need to worry about this unless you're theory crafting and really min-maxing. Same thing with this workload column. This is for theory crafters as well. Nothing is being calculated off of this, so you can ignore this if you're just looking for kind of the basics of this spreadsheet. But for advanced users, this is kind of the best data we have for what the workload of each node tends to be. Again, this number can change depending on how many people use the node. More popular nodes are going to be higher, less popular nodes are going to be lower. But this can always change if a bunch of players get wise to a certain node and start using it more often, then the workloads could go up. But most of these are already maxed out. Like all the 150s and 200s that you see are nodes that are already maxed out, so those are probably not going to change. Again, this is for advanced users, so if I'm confusing you right now, just bear with me for a minute and we'll get back to the easier stuff. But for if you want to be able to theory craft to decide which human, or which worker is going to be better, we have all the distance data over here. You can simply plug in that distance, maybe whatever it happens to be, 1900 distance, and then the speed of your worker, maybe he's got 4.6 speed, and this will tell you how many minutes it's going to take your worker to get to and from that node. So in this case, the distance portion of the node is going to be 13 minutes, 13.77 minutes, and then however many ticks the worker takes. So if it was 1 tick, then you'd have a total of 23 minutes. If it was 2 ticks, you'd have a total of 33 minutes. So that's all this thing in the top left is. It's just a basic distance calculator. Just change the blue nodes if you want to use that. Again, if you're new to the game or if I'm not making any sense, don't worry about anything I said over the last 2 minutes. We'll just carry on to the easier parts of the spreadsheet. The next column here is going to be the contribution spent column. This is also editable, so the blue indicates that you can change this if you want to. I have it set up to what I think probably 95% of you are going to be, the order that 95% of you are going to be taking these nodes, so probably you don't have to edit this column, but you can edit it if you want to. And this is all calculated incrementally, so if we start in, say, Heidel, and from Heidel we go to Lynch Farm Ruins and we take the Savagery node. And then from there, we go to Northern Plain of Serendia, and we take the Maple node. After that, we go up to Lynch Rands, take the Fleece node. That order of nodes that I'm expecting you to take is already calculated in the spreadsheet. So that's what this number is here. But you could change it if you want to. If you, for some reason, decided that you want to get the Fleece node before the Maple node, then you can go through and you can tweak those numbers so that, to calculate how much it would cost to go get the Fleece node first, probably would bump this up to like 4 or 5 contribution. And then you could go over to the Maple node, wherever that is, and change that one. That's really up to you. Like I said, most of you should not have to edit that. You should just be able to look over in this final column and get the comparison. But if you want to edit it, you can. This column right here, average yield, this is based on Balzor's research. So again, major shout out to Balzor from Black Desert Analytics. He is the one who did all the research to get these average yields. Some of these are more accurate than others. They're not perfect, but they're good enough that we can start to look at them and compare one node to another node and see how we should prioritize. So you might see me going through and changing these in the future, but they probably won't change significantly. We have pretty good reason to think that these numbers are fairly close to accurate. I would say within maybe a 10 or 20% margin of error. which is close enough. You know, these numbers don't have to be perfect for us to compare them and see roughly what order we should get them in. So this data is pretty good, and don't worry about changing it. The next column here is yields per day. This is based on 9 hours of inactivity per day and 15 hours of active or semi-active play. So again, same thing I said earlier, you don't have to literally be sitting in front of your computer for 15 hours a day, but as long as you can like use TeamViewer or something to remote in and feed your workers while you're at the office, you know, that's going to depend on you. You can go through and change these numbers if you want to. The way you would get this number is through the worker comparison tool that I taught you earlier. This number at the bottom is the important one. So you would see how long your worker takes to do the task, see how much stamina he has, plug that in, and then this bottom number is the one you would want to edit. It's going to take you, based on my experience, about 2 or 3 hours to go through and do that for all your nodes. So probably something that's worth doing one time just so you have that information for the future. But if that sounds like too much work, and you feel like your level of activity or your playstyle is similar enough to mine, then don't worry about editing that one either. This one, daily income, is automatically calculated based on how many yields per day you have. We're basically just taking the yields, taking the amount of resources that you expect to get on average from those yields, and then we're multiplying it by the market price of the item. Yes, that is included in the spreadsheet as well, and you can edit those freely if the market prices change. And then subtracting by how much beer you will spend. So all of that is calculated. I've done my best to make these numbers as precise as possible, but that'll tell you what the daily income is. Daily income, honestly, not really the most important number though. The most important number is daily income divided by contribution spent. Because if a node gets you 1 million silver per day, but it costs 10 contribution, that's not that good. So you want to look at it as a ratio of how much money you're making per contribution. I've gone through and basically this will automatically highlight the best nodes in green, the next best nodes in yellow, and the, you know, kind of get these later on once you're above 300 contribution type nodes in red. So I would say for new players, focus on getting the green ones. Once you get probably to like 200 or 250, you can start getting a lot of the yellow ones. Maybe not that much, maybe even like 150, you can start getting the yellow ones. And then the red nodes are going to be for players who are like 300, 350 CP and beyond. If you see a node that is not highlighted or that is grayed out, it's probably bad, but there are some exceptions to that. For example, these nodes at the top that are not highlighted, the potato and egg nodes, these are based off market value. So if you're selling your potatoes and your eggs to the market, don't bother. Those nodes are garbage. You should uninvest and do something else. However, if you're cooking and you're using the eggs and potatoes, then feel free to put in your own value. You know, these don't have to be market value. You should put whatever number you find the most useful. So for me, you know, making beer or whatever else, I probably value each potato at about 1,200 silver. And if I put that number 1,200 in and then I go and take another look at the potatoes, then they're really, really good. You can see they're highlighted in green. The numbers here are very solid. So that means that the potato nodes are definitely worthwhile for me. But again, if you're not using the potatoes, if you're just selling them on the market, you can see how bad that is, and it's pretty bad. You shouldn't be doing it. So this final column over here, the worker column, this is, I've already kind of done the min-maxing based on lodging to determine which worker you should be using for most of these nodes. Lodging is not explicitly calculated anywhere in the spreadsheet. There's really no good way for me to do that because, you know, people at different points in their worker empire are going to have different amounts of lodging. Also, there is pay-to-win lodging in the cash shop that you can get that changes the equation substantially. So there's no explicit way to calculate lodging, but I've set it up so that most of you can just, if you don't want to think about it, can just follow this column here. Quick edit on the topic of lodging. Throughout the entire game, you can expect to get about a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of one contribution for one worker, but there are some places where it's noticeably better and worse than that. So if you decide not to follow the spreadsheet and set up your own lodging, the spreadsheet is based on having the cash shop lodging, so if you don't have that, you might want to tweak a few things. Heidel has very cheap lodging. If you look at this top area up here, you can get about a 0.5 to 1 ratio, meaning you only have to spend about half a point of contribution per worker. And that opens up options like sending Heidel workers to media nodes. Even though tariff is going to be a little bit closer to some of these nodes, you can send Heidel workers there, sacrifice a bit of distance, and save yourself the extra contribution points. So that can be an option for some cities. There is also some farmland lodging that's pretty important. I'd say the most important ones to know about are Tuscany Farm has some Velia lodging, and Sherry Farm has very reasonably priced lodging for tariff. You can find farm lodging for other cities, but usually it's not necessary. But you know, if you are struggling for lodging in a region, definitely check out the surrounding areas. Trent has some lodging at Longleaf Sentry and some lodging at Bear, but it's also pretty expensive. In general, Trent, Euphoria, Keplen, and Arihaza all have more expensive lodging. For those towns, you're going to have to spend about 2 points of contribution per worker, sometimes even 3 points of contribution per worker. And throughout every city, the more workers you have, the more expensive it tends to get. So the best lodging for Calpheon, you can start down here in this bottom left corner, and then there's a bunch of little one-to-one houses you can buy for Calpheon lodging elsewhere. The best lodging in Olvia looks like this right here. You can kind of take a look at those and see which ones you should start with. Some of these are a tree, so make sure you get them together to get the most value. Same thing, Alta Nova, this area right here, is really good, inexpensive lodging. And for the rest of the cities, it's pretty obvious to just go to the filter up here, find lodging, and click on them. And you know, for the smaller towns, it's pretty easy to figure out which ones are the best. All right, that's enough for the lodging edit. Let's get back to the main recording. There are, for I'd say probably about 80% of the nodes in the game, it's pretty simple. The best worker is just comes from whatever city is closest, and whoever can, you know, get the most yields per day. But there are some cases where it gets a little weird. Balanos is probably the best example of that. So in Balanos, I talked about this a little bit in the top 10 video, but I actually have a lot of Olvia workers going to nodes that are very close to Velia. And the reason for that is because Velia lodging is so restrictive that if I want to have these nodes in Eastern Balanos, I'm going to run out of Velia workers. And so you come up with weird scenarios where, like, for Imp Cave and Coastal Cave, even though these are very close to Velia, I'm actually using Olvia workers to get these nodes. And that's just because Velia lodging, there's only so much lodging you can get. And the best way that I found to min-max this, obviously it's better to send Olvia workers to the closer nodes rather than send, you know, Olvia workers all the way over to like Iwaz Hill. That would be even more wasteful. So the way I've min-maxed this, I've gone ahead and put that on the spreadsheet. If you want to follow my setup, this is exactly what my setup is right here. This is exactly what I use. But if your playstyle is different, if your setup is different, then maybe you would want to change those. I also, this is not shown on the spreadsheet, but I also have kind of like a little trick that I use to keep track of my workers. Basically, I know what the best worker for each node is going to be. If I don't have that worker on a node, then I will highlight it in red. So that tells me that at some point, like say, even though for this Ash node I'm supposed to have a human, maybe I've got a giant on it because I haven't been able to hire a human yet. I'll highlight that in red to let me know that I need to go at some point in the future hire a different worker. If I have the right worker but he needs a promotion, I'll highlight him in yellow so that I know, you know, I can take a look and see which nodes, you know, have workers that need promotions, and then compare all the different yellow ones and say, okay, well, I have 2 different guys that need to be promoted, but this node is a lot more important than this node, so I'm going to promote this guy first. So I'll have some guys that are highlighted in red, some guys that are highlighted in yellow. And then if I have the right worker, and he's an artisan worker, so he doesn't need promotions, but he doesn't have the right skills, I still need to reroll his skills to get like a 150 speed goblin or whatever, then I'll highlight that in green. And if the worker is an artisan and he's got the right skills and he's perfect and he's done, I'll highlight him in blue. So that's just kind of how I do it. You can follow that or not. but I've found that to be very, very useful so that I don't have to constantly go back in game and look at every single one of my nodes to remind myself who needs promotions and who needs to be rehired. I just keep track of all that on the spreadsheet, and I found that to be way, way easier. So definitely save a copy of this for yourself and do that if you want to. This notes column over here has all kinds of information. Some of this has to do with the order that you would take the nodes. So for example, over in Ewaz Hill, you want to get the ash node first and the mushroom node second, and that is indicated in the notes over here. Some of these are going to be inflated. So for example, this fortune teller mushroom node, 170 silver per contribution. That's pretty good. But the only reason for that is because you take it after the ash node. So you're spending 2 contribution to get Ewaz Hill and the ash. In other words, you're spending 1 contribution for Ewaz Hill and then 1 contribution specifically for the ash node. Let me show that end game in case that's confusing. So 1 contribution for the hill, and then another contribution for the ash, and then a 3rd contribution for the mushroom. So the way that that's expressed on the spreadsheet is we're spending 2 contribution up front just to get there and get the first node. And this is the number that we get for Ewaz Hill. Very, very good. That's one of the top 10 nodes from the previous video. And then after that, we only have to spend 1 contribution to get that mushroom node at 170k. But we couldn't just go straight to the mushroom node and spend 1 CP on it. You see what I mean? We have to have the area node first. So that's what this note is indicating, is that you only get the value here after you've invested in the ash node. And I've got several notes here where I tell you kind of the order that you have to do things in order to get the value that is displayed here. Because otherwise some of these numbers are inflated. Some of these also include secondary yields. I don't have secondary yields for every node, but I have them for most of the important ones. I've got secondary yields for saps, rough crystals, and platinum. The platinum nodes over in Media, I've got secondary yields for those. So a lot of the materials, the secondary materials that I consider to be pretty important, I've got yields for those, and that's all automatically calculated. Again, if you just put in whatever the numbers that you feel, if rough mud crystal is worth, this is the market price for rough mud crystal, but if you're a steel Taratus crafter and you think it's worth more than that, then you can change that, and that will affect the Southern Cianaga iron node, the one that gives rough mud crystal. And so all those notes I have here, not only what the material that's being calculated is, but you can see all the calculation here. Not only what that material is, but also what my best guess for what the yield is. And in the case of rough crystal, I think it probably averages out to about 1 crystal per yield. You can get as many as like 4, but that doesn't happen very often, and sometimes you get 0. So again, these numbers aren't perfect, but they're close enough that they're pretty good to use to compare. The other thing you'll find in the notes over here is some of these are calculated as clusters. So for Foniel's Cabin and Bear Riverhead, you can't just go straight to Bear Riverhead and get, and have that cost 4 contribution for 170k per CP. You have to take that as a cluster with Foniel's Cabin, and in that case, I have a little note here saying this 4 plus 4 is actually an 8 CP cluster that you have to take together. You can't break this up. If you do break this up, you have to calculate it differently. A lot of these you'll see decimals. That's because these are being calculated as clusters as well. So Northern Wheat Plantation has 3 different nodes, and I'm basically dividing all those. And but these don't technically cost 2.3 each. They have obviously individual costs. I'm just calculating these as a group, and so that's the best way I feel to get honest numbers as far as what our income per contribution is here. But if you want to do these clusters out of order, then you might want to change the numbers over in this blue column. There's not really many cases you would need to do that though, so if this is getting a little bit too advanced, then like I said, don't sweat it. Don't worry about editing this too much. Just look at this column and use this as a tool to prioritize where you should be developing your worker empire. Focus on the green, and then focus on the yellow, and then focus on the red. These will also change color automatically. So as we saw earlier with the potato node, I don't know if I mentioned that, but if you do change the value of potatoes, these will highlight in green, so don't worry, you don't have to highlight them yourself. I've got conditional formatting in here that will do that for you, assuming that it works properly when you save your own copy. And that is about it for the for the node tool. I guess the only other thing that you would see in the notes is that sometimes I have giant yields in here. So this is, again, another advanced technique, but if you can get giants who can one-shot or even two-shot some of these nodes, sometimes they can become better than humans because of the extra stamina. It's usually only true if the node is very, very close to a town and if your giant has over 100 speed. But if that's the case, I have some notes for a few of these as far as like how much better you can expect the giants to be. Generally, he's about 10% better than the human if it's really close to town and if you can get that 100 speed breakpoint. But if not, you know, just stick with the human. Don't worry about it. It's kind of hard to get a 100 speed giant, so I wouldn't sweat it too much. It's only a 10% difference. It's much more important to get goblins with good skills, because 150 speed goblin versus 145 speed goblin can be a huge increase. It can be like a 60% increase. So yeah, focus on getting good skills on your goblins and don't worry as much about the giants. Humans are usually a perfectly fine substitute for giants in most cases, unless you're a player who's away from the computer for, you know, very extended periods of time. And in that case, use the worker comparison tool to figure it all out. I think that's about all I have to say about this. Oh, you'll see that some of these are bold and some of these are italicized. Bold ones mean that usually those materials sell pretty well and sell close to max price. And italics is the reverse of that. If you see one of these that's italicized, that means be careful with that one. Just because the market value, for example, with tiger mushrooms is $4.49, doesn't mean you'll actually be able to sell it. It might sit there for days. It might actually expire and not sell at all. So be careful with the ones that are italicized. And, you know, keep in mind, you guys, this is based on the NA market, and this is based on May 30th, 2017. So if you're watching this video a month or even a week from now, many of this could have changed. A lot of these are very stable, like timbers and ores tend to be very stable, but some of the mushrooms can be very volatile. I'll see some of these mushrooms will be max price, sold out, and then 3 days later they'll be totally flooded, and then 3 days later they'll be maxed out again. So, you know, there's no real long-term perfect number for this, but I'll do my best to update these, but you probably are going to have to do a little bit work on your own version of the spreadsheet to update these as well. I'll probably publish numbers on this spreadsheet every couple of weeks, so if you want to come back and copy and paste these numbers onto your own spreadsheet, I'll do my best to keep them updated, but like I said, the market's always changing, so it's never going to be perfect. With that being said, in general, this is a pretty easy prioritization tool for a new player to just hop in and see which nodes are going to be the best ones, and this does cover every node except for the fishing nodes. So whether you're a new player and you're confused by a lot of what I said, or you're an advanced player who's going to use, you know, distance and workload to min-max this to your own specific setup, you know, either way, I hope that you guys found this sort of tool useful. If you have any additional questions, you know, I know some of this stuff is confusing, feel free to post comments, feel free to hop in Discord and hit me up there. Also, feel free to jump into the Twitch channel. I'm live on Twitch about 4 or 5 days a week playing Black Desert, and then 1 or 2 days a week playing other stuff. So feel free to hop into the Twitch channel, Moreland TV, and ask me questions there. If you guys found this content useful and you want to support me and help me to continue to create this kind of stuff, both advanced and simple guides, then there will be a little Patreon button on the side of the screen, so feel free to click on that, and I deeply appreciate any support that you want to throw my way. That's about it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.